when you have 25% turnover in the House on a very regular basis, you have to re-educate people, the new people that show up every single 2-year time frame. And that takes a lot of time. And it does get in the way of, solving really big problems over the long term. So, I mean, I'm proud of some of the things that we did. I'm also, I feel regret and frustration over the fact that there's not a lot of political courage in the legislature that was willing to take the tough kinds of votes that I feel like were really necessary.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. And today, our guest is Ivy Spohnholz, the Alaska State Director for the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy is a global environmental organization and the largest nonprofit by assets in the Americas. Their mission is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. Prior to becoming the Alaska Director of the Nature Conservancy, Ivy had served 3 terms in the Alaska House of Representatives, where she chaired the Ways and Means Committee and co-chaired the Labor and Commerce Committee. She passed several important pieces of legislation during her time in office, most notably a price transparency and healthcare law and a law expanding telehealth. We discuss her sudden entry into the legislature when she was appointed to replace Max Gruenberg, who had died unexpectedly in 2016. We also discuss her surprising decision not to seek re-election last year. That decision not to run in 2022 opened the door for me, and I now serve in the Alaska legislature in the seat formerly held by Ivy Spohnholz and before her, Max Gruenberg. Ivy Spohnholz, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
You were born in Nebezna.
I was.
In a dry cabin.
Yes.
But you moved to Anchorage when you were young?
Yeah, my parents separated when I was young. And so my mom moved with me and my younger brother, Jesse, to Anchorage. She got remarried here to my adoptive father, Ron. And they had 2 more children. I grew up here in Anchorage for the most part.
So 4 kids and you were the oldest of your moms.
Mm-hmm.
Did your dad have any other children?
No.
And did you stay close with your dad? Did you stay in contact with him?
My biological father?
Yes.
No, not really. I'm close with his family, but not as close with him.
Did he stay out in Nebezna?
He stayed out in Nebezna for a few years, and then he went into Fairbanks and was really involved in the cross-country ski and cycling community there. So we know each other, but he just wasn't involved in my life. And I had a dad, Ron Spohnholz, who was there for me. And so...
Yeah. Is he still alive, your biological father?
He sure is, and he still lives in Fairbanks.
So you grew up in Anchorage, and you graduated from...
No, I didn't graduate. I went to Stellar Secondary, and then I went briefly to West High School and Save 2. I sort of joke that I was a late bloomer. Wasn't very motivated in high school because I had intended to be a professional ballet dancer, and I was semi-professional. I actually got a full ride scholarship to the University of Utah, whether or not I graduated. It was not an academic scholarship. It was a talent scholarship. So my mom and I agreed with the folks at the Anchorage School District that the best thing for me was to get a GED and move to Utah. So I moved to Utah 3 days after I turned 18.
Wow. Yeah. Well, let's back up a little bit. When did you start doing ballet?
When I was about 3. My mom...
not in Nebezna.
Not in Nebezna, right here in Anchorage. Yeah. No, there's still not a ballet school in Nebezna. Yeah. No, I took classes with Steve Primus, who was also the basketball and soccer coach at Chugiak High School for a long time. Coached my brother Jake in high school, but danced with him and then danced with Alaska Dance Theater for a long time until, and then went off to college at the University of Utah on a full ride scholarship and joined their semi-professional company, Utah Ballet.
Well, I'm sure like another interviewer would have done a better research, but this is not in the bios that come right up. Like, that's why I'm... Yeah. So Utah, what was it like moving to Utah as an 18-year-old who hadn't graduated from high school?
It was very interesting. I mean, I didn't really know what I was getting into in moving to Utah. What I knew was that I had a full ride scholarship to a really really great dance school. The University of Utah is one of the best dance schools in the country, and it's associated with Ballet West. And I had done a summer program with Ballet West. They had really amazing teachers. And I was able to join their semi-professional dance company, Utah Ballet. And, I took German and math and just all the things that you do. The dance company was really interesting because, I would do my academics basically between like 8 and 10, and my classes were like 10:30 to about 2:30 every day.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got to tour throughout Utah, which was pretty cool. So I got to go to these little towns and perform and be in a lot of really interesting productions. It was a blast, actually. That was fun.
Were there other ballerinas there on full ride scholarships?
Not a lot of them.
So I'm guessing you were really good.
I was pretty good. I think I could have gone professional, but my mom was really smart. She negotiated with me that I wouldn't go professional until I'd finished college.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, you need a backup plan, because we knew that I didn't want to be a dance teacher professionally. I wanted to be a performing artist, and we knew that career only lasts so long. It's a very rare number of people that perform really past like 35 years old. And so she was like, you need a backup plan. If you get a college degree, you'll earn on average about $1 million more over the course of your lifetime, Ivy. Get that college degree and then you can go pro. And then I went to college and I decided I didn't want to go pro.
Why not?
I ended up changing my major. Well, I was really thin at the time and I was just working my tail off. I had to work a job outside of dance. I was just getting kind of skinny and I was having trouble keeping weight on. And I really loved the dance, but I realized that ballet dancers don't get paid very much. I was going to have to wait tables in the off season. And then I was going to have to reinvent myself very quickly.
The stereotype I have is that ballerinas can't be too skinny, but were they telling you that you were too skinny?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I was so thin that they had me see a nutritionist because they were worried that I was anorexic. And when I did a food log, they were like, oh, you're not anorexic. You are, eating like a horse. I just couldn't keep the weight on and I just wasn't eating enough. I was pretty poor at the time.
My limited understanding of ballet is that the things that you do with your body are to look good on stage. They're not necessarily the healthiest things. And this is coming from a friend who was a ballerina who has a lot of back trouble that she thinks could have been from some of the stuff that she did in her youth. Did you feel like ballet was good for your body or?
Well, yes and no. No, I mean, I definitely have like lifelong issues. I mean, my lower back, I have to be really careful. And I did my first physical therapy when I was 12 years old.
Because it was already hurting?
Because I was spraining my ankles on a regular basis. I did work on a resistance machine. I saw chiropractors all through high school. So it is really hard on your body. It also gives you, though, like a lot of sort of mind-body connection. I was so strong. I was both strong and flexible. And so I could, do a lot of things that it gave me a lot of physical control over my body that allowed me to go on and do other things later. I, became like a runner and understood the value of that core exercise and taking care of my body. I understood that my body was is something that you have to take care of. You can't just, if you don't use it, you lose it. And I understood that my body was essentially like a musical instrument or, that I had to continue to care for my whole life in order to be healthy. And so I think there were pluses and minuses to that. On the whole, ballet was really good for me. It gave me focus and discipline, and kept me motivated all through my high school years and also gave me some focus to go to college.
How often did you have ballet practice as a youth?
So when I was young, until I was about, I went, you start out 1 day a week and then you go to 2 days a week. And then by the time I was in, I think middle school, I was going 3 days a week. By the time I was in high school, I was dancing. I think I had classes 3 days a week, but then I would often have practices more frequently. So I was probably dancing, 3 to 5 days a week. And then, during big performance times every day.
Mm.
Yeah.
Did you encourage any of your daughters to do ballet?
None of my daughters did ballet.
Because they weren't interested, or because
they weren't interested? Yeah, they weren't interested. And I didn't feel like my job as a parent was to make them want to do the things that I want to do. I felt like my job as a parent was to teach them to be healthy, to understand that they needed to take care of their body and their mind, and value themselves in all of those ways. We spent a lot of time when the kids were young, cross-country skiing and backpacking and things like this. One of my daughters cross-country skied through high school. She wasn't very competitive. She just liked it for the social aspect and the exercise. It was a great way to get outside and in the wintertime, at a time when a lot of people aren't getting outside. One of my daughters did cross country, but none of them are very athletic now.
Do you watch ballet now?
I haven't seen a ballet in years, actually. I think the last time I saw a ballet, I took my daughters to the Nutcracker, and they loved it. The Nutcracker is different for me than it is for them, because for them, it was just like this fun, fantasy, like it is for a lot of young children. For me, I was, it was almost like the music of the Nutcracker was almost like a mantra. It took me back to my childhood. I have so many like fun memories of, Thanksgiving weekends at the Performing Arts Center, with all of my girlfriends and boyfriends just doing, the show over and over again, and how much fun that whole ritual was. And so it's a different kind of a thing for me, but I haven't been to the ballet in quite some time.
So that was an interesting digression.
I know. That's not what you were expecting today, huh?
No, you ended up graduating from University of Washington with a bachelor's in political science.
Yeah.
Was that interest in political science informed because your mom was a politician?
Yeah, we were definitely a political family. We talked a lot about politics and ideas as a family. I interned on David Finkelstein's campaign way back in the day in high school. And that was formative for me. I went and worked for a political consultant for a while in Seattle. I've always been really interested in policy and the ways that you can try to make the world a better place. Both my parents were public servants in different ways. So my mom, was in politics, and she worked in workforce development for a while. My parents were foster parents as well. That was really formative form of service and community building. And then my father was a police officer. So it was just like, we were just steeped in service to others. It was kind of like the family business. And so it wasn't really a stretch for me to think that I wanted to do that. But then when I went to, when I worked in political consulting, I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do for my career. And I kind of looked around at my skill set and realized that nonprofit fundraising was a way that I could satisfy my curiosity to learn a lot about a lot of different things. And I've worked to make the world a better place a little bit at a time. So I worked for, a whole series of nonprofits over the years, including Abused Women's Aid in Crisis. I worked at the University of Alaska Anchorage for a long time, including like my big claim to fame there was that I worked on the largest private contribution the university had ever received at that time, which is a $15 million investment from ConocoPhillips, which created an Arctic Science and Engineering endowment there and finished the ConocoPhillips Integrated Science Building. So it was a great career for me.
I want to go back to something you said. So I know you're the oldest of four.
Yeah.
You said your parents were foster parents.
Mm-hmm.
What was, there were a lot of kids in the house, or did they only foster one at a time? Or just tell us a little bit about that and what that experience was like.
Yeah, no, there was a lot of children in my house. So my parents started doing fostering when I was pretty young. I would say I was probably about like 5 or 6 when they started fostering, and they fostered until I was just shy of middle school. So for about 6 years.
How old is your youngest sibling? I mean, how much younger?
7 years.
Okay, so even before your youngest sister was born.
Yeah, right around that time. And actually, I don't know the exact sequence of that. I think we did a foster before Grace was born. Grace was born in 1980 as my sister. She's the youngest of us. And so we had anywhere from like 1 to 4 foster children at any point in time. And then we also, my my godmom and her son, Mark, lived with us as well for part of my childhood. So my childhood was one where, we had a big house full of kids. It was fun to be a kid in my house. And we were like the place where the other kids in the neighborhood came because my mom loved loved caregiving and parenting. And we lived up on hillside and we could kind of free range, up, and it was fun.
And there was no negative experiences with having, I'm just thinking that.
With fostering?
Uh-huh.
I don't remember having any negative experiences. I think I was aware in the way that you can be as a child. It's not a very nuanced understanding, but I was aware that some of the kids around us were not, they had bad experiences in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And it meant that sometimes they weren't able to be their best selves or they were stressed out. And we also had there's a couple of girls that lived with us off and on that went back and forth trying to go back to their biological family. And so I was aware that the children that were living with us didn't have it the way that I did. And my mom really leaned into teaching us empathy, which I think was a real gift. And later on, my husband and I, because we both worked outside of the home, we knew we wanted to do something, but we decided we couldn't foster in the way that my parents had. It takes a lot of time and energy to foster that many kids. So what we decided to do was to sort of make a long-term commitment to one child. And so we became licensed foster parents, and we fostered our daughter, Kim, and then adopted her a year later. And
your parents did not adopt any foster children?
No.
Do you still have contact with any of the foster kids that went through your house?
No. In fact, there's a couple of them that, if social media had been around back then, we'd probably be connected now, but I haven't had any contact with any of them as adults. Yeah.
So, you got a master's immediately after?
No, I took a break. So I finished my undergraduate degree. We moved home then in 1999 after our oldest daughter, Iris, was born.
Oh, okay. So did you meet your husband, Troy?
I met him in Utah.
Oh, when you were a ballerina.
Boy. Yeah. He's a Utah boy. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We met working together. We worked for a nonprofit supporting adults with developmental disabilities that lived in the community. Mm-hmm. And I just thought he was not only cute, but he just had the best values. And I was so impressed by the care and empathy he showed the people that we worked with.
And did he... I assume you were both really young.
We were young, yeah.
And, you're both in Alaska. Mm-hmm. He's from Utah.
Yeah.
Was that just like an easy talk?
Yeah, actually. So he was, I think part of the reason he was so excited about dating me in the first place was that I was from Alaska. He was like, oh, you're from Alaska. He had always had this fantasy about coming to Alaska and living in a cabin in the woods. And actually today he just was coming back from our cabin in the woods. So, coming to Alaska was a dream that he had. And I think that I was like a great way for him to be able to realize that. And we had great chemistry right away. We were both very serious young adults. And so we met when I was probably 20 and he was 23. And then we got married when I was 23 and he was 26.
This might be like too personal of a question, but Utah is Latter-day Saints country. What was Troy LDS?
No, he's not, but his family is.
Okay.
So, gotten to know the church and the community a lot more through him over the years, but he's not religious.
Mm. So you had your first child, you were just explaining when you were
first child in Seattle.
Seattle. And then,
and then we moved home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was our plan, always planned to move home, but I wanted to sow some wild oats and live in the big city for a little while. So we lived in Seattle for about 4 years and then moved home in 1999 when our daughter Iris was 1. And then had Maya a couple years later and started our careers here. It was great being close to family and feeling so connected to my community again.
I want to bounce back again.
Yeah.
So when you were growing up, your mom was first appointed to the legislature when there was like a redo of a vote for Finkelstein. Do you remember that? Like, do you remember when she was first?
Yeah, I remember I was 16. She actually got the call from the governor on my 16th birthday.
Oh, wow.
Which...
it was
my
Cooper
16,
was the governor.
Yeah, it was Steve Cooper, who called her. And so she ended up going to Juneau, and, we all stayed in Anchorage. And we had 4 kids going to
And you were the oldest, so
yeah. So we stayed in Anchorage with my stepdad and dad,
with your stepdad and dad?
Mm-hmm. I lived with my stepdad and my mom.
But your dad was also in Anchorage?
And my dad was also in Anchorage, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. My dad, Ron, lived here through my whole childhood. He only left Alaska a few years ago, so.
Okay, gotcha.
3 dads. Biological dad,
Ron,
adoptive dad, Ron, and stepdad.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, sorry.
Complicated story.
It's a complicated story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a lot of dads. Father's Day is a big day for me.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So you stayed here, and that was like for 4 months.
Yeah, it was just...
It was basically the session.
Yeah,
she was the whole session.
It was basically the session, yeah. So we went down and visited her over spring break, which was really cool. So I got introduced on the house floor by my mom, which was neat. And I have a picture of me in the gallery. Can
you explain, for those of us who weren't here and don't know, they redid the election. Why did they do that?
So this was before there was a provision for how to resolve a tie election. Now we use a game of lot.
Yes.
Is I think the legal term of art. And we always flipped a coin, but at that time there wasn't any provision in it. So what they did was they did a revote. They did a special election for that. So my mom served essentially for that one session while they had a special election.
Because was it going to be Finkelstein's first term?
It was his first time. Yeah.
Gotcha.
After he got elected.
Yeah.
He won that special election.
Roger.
Yeah.
And then your mom ran for office a couple of times.
Yeah.
Before we started the interview, I looked at the numbers, just insanely close.
Yeah.
I guess, but you were out of state.
No, well, so I was out of state for those elections. Think about that for a second. Yeah, I was out of state for those elections. So
I guess just for our listeners, she lost the 2 elections by less than 30 votes, each of them.
Yeah.
And then she had won the Democratic primary for one of them by 1 vote.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really intense.
Very intense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I think her first election, I was still at home. The first election, I was at home because I remember we were in Hawaii. And she still had to do some work on the campaign. So it was the second election. And that was when she ran in the primary against Sharon Cisna. She lost.
Did you help her on a campaign?
No, I didn't volunteer in my mom's campaigns. Like a lot of teenagers, I was kind of doing my own thing. And politics in the campaign was my mom's thing. And I was trying to differentiate myself from my mom at that point in time. So I did a little bit of volunteering, but I wasn't like super active in her campaigns. Yeah.
So there was definitely some symmetry in that your mother was appointed to a position and then you were appointed in 2016. So I've heard you tell the story before. I love the story. If you can just talk a little bit about getting appointed and what that experience was like.
Oh, goodness gracious. That was just a wild ride. So the late Representative Max Gruenberg had a heart attack and died on Valentine's Day in 2016. And a lot of people, I knew Max. I didn't know him very well, but I knew him, and I was just, surprised and kind of just reading the newspapers.
And he was a very long time legislator because
he'd served twice.
Yeah, like in the 80s to the early 90s and then again.
Exactly. And so I actually really knew him mostly from door knocking. He was my representative, right? Mm-hmm. So he'd knocked on my door, and he and his wife, Kayla, who's now a dear friend of mine, knocked on my door. And so that's how I knew him really mostly at that time. And then I started getting phone calls, and texts, and people started knocking on my door asking me if I wanted to be a representative.
You were the director of the Salvation Army?
I was the director of development. Okay. I was the highest ranking non-clergy in the Salvation Army in Alaska at that time, I loved that job. I got to work in 19 communities across the state of Alaska. We worked on homeless prevention, substance abuse treatment, and a lot of other really important social services programs around McKinnell House, those kinds of things. It was really meaningful work, and I'd wanted to work statewide, and that's why one of the reasons I went there.
So people started calling.
People started calling me, knocking on my door, and Forrest Dunbar knocked on my door and asked me if I wanted to run. And he was running for campaign that year, but he was making sure he could talk to me. And anyway, so I was like, well, maybe I should think about this a little bit. And I had kind of toyed with the idea of running when I was younger, and decided not to do that. And so it was kind of just not on my radar as something that I really wanted to do. I had a good job. And then, sort of talking it over with my friends and my husband, and really, I'd always been super mission focused, and we were serving 37,000 people at the Salvation Army, helping to make those 37,000 people's lives better or not worse. And that was really meaningful. But then I was like, ROI, I can serve 700,000 Alaskans doing this. And realized I just really didn't have anything to lose. Like, what did I have to lose by just, throwing my name in the hat? And so I went through the process. You interview with a party, then your name gets forwarded to the governor. I went and interviewed the governor.
Governor Walker.
It was Governor Walker. Yeah. I was in Juneau for an Alaska Children's Trust Board meeting at that time. And so, was able to go and meet with him in person, and we just had great chemistry. We were supposed to have a 15-minute meeting, and 50 minutes later, we were still talking. March 10th, so it's 3 weeks after Representative Gruenberg passed away, I was sworn in. I flew in the night before.
Well, I'm going to stop you because you had expected a call on a Friday. You had been told that you were going to get a call on a Friday.
That's right.
And then a weekend passed and you didn't hear anything. Yep. And you actually were...
Yeah, I thought I didn't have it. I was like, that's fine. He was going to call me on Friday. If I didn't get the call on Friday, then I don't have the job. So I just kind of
And you were at peace with that?
Sort of, whatever. I had a great job. I was actually a finalist for another statewide CEO role at that time. And, it was onward ho. And then I got a call, and I got a call from the governor, and
on Monday.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. After 5 p.m. I kind of remembered some details.
Yeah. Yes, you did remember some details, didn't you? I got a phone call after 5 p.m. from the governor, and then immediately I got a call from Chris Tuck, who was the House Minority Leader at the time. And I remember this very well. He said, "We're your new family now." I was like, all right, well, okay. I didn't really know very much about the caucus system. I hadn't been a student of the legislature.
You weren't watching Gavel to Gavel.
No, I'd never watched Gavel to Gavel in my life. And then, I walked down the hall and told my boss that I had been offered this position and I was going to take it. And he said, "I wish you good luck." I wrapped up things at work on,
Tuesday.
When was it Tuesday? I think I wrapped it up on Wednesday afternoon because I led a team. So I wrapped things up on Wednesday afternoon. I flew down on Thursday.
And you arrived super early in the morning. Or no you got there Wednesday night.
It was Tuesday. You're right. It was Wednesday night. It was Tuesday that I wrapped up my job in 24 hours. It's kind of bonkers to think about that.
Because all of this is such craziness.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No. So I think you did arrive in the morning because you went straight to the Capitol and was sworn in. Because then you were on the floor until like after midnight. And then you had to drive yourself to where you were staying and you didn't know how to get there.
Yes. No, you're so right. It was that morning. Gosh. Man, I think I've repressed that memory. That was a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, you got sworn in and it was budget. The budget had hit the floor and it was like all day into the night. You finished and your very first day in Juneau, you borrowed, I think,
Jonathan Christ Tompkins' vehicle. He loaned me his old beat up Jeep.
And you had to figure out where you were staying.
It was like pouring rain. I had never driven in Juneau at 2:30 in the morning or 2:45 in the morning. Yeah, that was a bonkers day. That was amazing. Yeah. Yeah, that was Thursday. Yeah. And then on Friday, I did my orientation.
Well, the reason why those details are so firmly entrenched in my brain is because I knew the story before I served in Juneau. And it didn't mean
as much to you.
No. But then once you're there and, and you're going through these things, like the budget, it means something. Yeah. And so now that I have the context to think oh, can I imagine if I arrived in the morning and got sworn in and then had to go to my seat on the floor and then do this for 16 hours? I can't even imagine. Did you speak that day?
I did.
Wow. That is really impressive.
Yeah, I think I spoke on 3 amendments.
Wow.
Well, they were things that I knew about.
That's so good. That's so great, though. I mean, for my other freshman colleagues who might be listening, I think the first couple of times that you put your mic up, you are petrified. I remember at the breaks being like, what exactly am I going to say? What exactly am I going to say? Because you don't want to be humiliated.
Yeah. No, you want to be really thoughtful about it because it is, people are listening, but the things that I spoke on were things that I was really familiar with. The UMed Road extension was proposed to punch through basically right next to my neighborhood. So I was very familiar with that. I was really familiar with the university, because I'd worked there for 8 years and I understood how important it was to have a well-funded university. And I spoke about things that I knew about.
Here is Rep. Spohnholz speaking on the day she arrived, shortly after she had been sworn into the House, March 10th, 2016. She is speaking in support of an amendment that would eliminate a cut to the University of Alaska's budget. Those who supported that cut had suggested that private donors would make up the loss in state money. Ivy, as a former fundraiser for the university, knew that this wasn't true. But as you will hear Ivy herself realize, and later Speaker of the House Mike Schoenholz say, we are not supposed to speak about something that is not in the amendment itself. I cannot even imagine doing what Ivy is doing here. It took me weeks to get the courage to speak on the floor. Here she is.
As a nonprofit fundraiser and a former fundraiser for the university, I'm acutely aware of the importance and the value of this kind of investment in the university. But what we also know is that individual donor growth does not happen at the scale that these cuts would require it to do. And what will happen instead is that we will be asking private donors and alumni to invest in a university that is becoming mediocre and broken. Nobody wants to invest in a sinking ship. That is not what you want to do with your hard-earned dollars. And if we all think about where we put I'm speaking out of order again, aren't I here? I'm still working on the rules of order. My apologies, Speaker. Individual donors have to think very carefully about where they put their precious dollars. And this is even more true as we move into what is sure to become a recession. We need to be very, very careful about what kind of expectations we have of private donor support, and that the transition that we ask the university to make is measured and thoughtful. And that's why I would be supporting this amendment. Thank you.
I will remind members that try to stay on the topic of the amendment, and certainly we're all passionate about whatever the issue happens to be, but I would ask you to try to stay on track.
So Chris Tuck had called you and said, this is your new family now, and you were in the minority, and you started off in the minority, and then you ran the first time that year.
Yeah. I ran the first time that year. There was also 4 special sessions that year.
Wow.
So this was at the beginning of, Bill Walker vetoed the permanent, portion of the permanent fund dividend that year. I mean, it was like this epic period of time. And that's actually one of the reasons that I decided to run was that, as a child of Alaska, I had been seeing, our state rise and fall with the price of oil my whole life. And I remember in the late 80s when we lost about, 44,000 people in out-migration in the late 80s. I mean, I feel it felt like half of my high school left the state of Alaska at that time. Like we were hemorrhaging people. And then that happened over and over again. And it was happening again because the price of oil was down it was down really low again. And so it was happening again. I was like, we have to get off of this roller coaster. Somebody needs to show up and do something about it. And Governor Walker, wanted to start a conversation. He did. I mean, I think many would argue it was a politically fatal conversation to start, but he was very courageous and vetoed part of the dividend that year. And then we had 4 special sessions. So I was like campaigning between special sessions because you can't raise money during those things and during special sessions at all. It was a really challenging first year. It was also really interesting because all of a sudden I like overnight turned into a politician, and that means, some people revere you and other people hate you all of a sudden. And I'd gone from working in an organization like the Salvation Army where people treat you with so much respect, to being cussed at by people when I knocked at the door. And I was just like shocked. I was like, you don't know me. Like, just don't answer the door if you don't like my ideas. That's fine. But it was really, it was a real like psychological mind shift that happened very quickly for me. That was very intense. I imagine it was for you as well. I mean, it's different.
Well, real time today. Yeah. So I went to the office and my staff said that there was a phone call from a very angry person. Didn't give me any details, wanted to talk about housing and homelessness. I was like, okay, I'll do the call. Yeah. I did the call, and then I listened to the voicemail in which they referred to me with really bad language. And it was one of the things where I said to the staff, I was like, you maybe just play the voicemail for me before, I probably would not have, I would not have probably made that phone call. As it turned out, I actually, in retrospect, I'm glad they did because like so many things in life, people are willing to say things in a voicemail that they won't say when you're on the phone. Yeah, he did not scream epithets at me when I was actually on the phone. Didn't exactly apologize, but we had a normal conversation. Yeah. But yeah, no, it is not something that is not fun.
No, that is really, really hard. And they do it people do it on social media as well. But I think also it is interesting that, you point out that people sometimes will say things when they're not actually talking to you that they wouldn't say to you in real life. I think, much of the art and the real work of politics is just having conversations with those people. Sometimes those people are people that you work with, and sometimes they're people that you work for as a politician. And, you don't have to, you don't always have to agree, but there's been plenty of times when I've had conversations with somebody who thought that I was, completely misguided and was very frank at letting me know that. And then I would kind of walk them through the facts and information, and their rhetoric would calm down, their demeanor would change, and, got to the point where there was, trust and respect. Now, it doesn't happen every single time, but I think that that's really important work. And that's where, some of the toughest and most important work is, particularly at this moment in time in our country where, there's so much objectification of people that are different than us. And social media really amplifies that in a whole bunch of ways, partially because they aren't making eye contact when they're saying this to you, but also partially because we, only hear the stories that reinforce the things that we want, and it amplifies conflict and misinformation. But if we're not having those real, authentic conversations, that isolation and that disconnection gets more and more amplified over time. And the answers, I heard somebody say recently that, democracy needs to be everybody's side hustle in America right now. And I just could not agree more emphatically than that. Like, we all need to be talking to everybody, even if they really deeply disagree with us, because they need to remember that, you're still a human being. You're a father. You're a husband. You serve our country. You serve our state. You're a healthcare provider. You're a real person. And then when you get to that real humanity, that's where the problem solving.
So when I got elected,
Mm-hmm.
I got some advice from an elected official
Mm-hmm.
who said that when I got to Juneau, I needed to be having dinner 2 or 3 nights a week with Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
And I had never run for office before,
Mm-hmm.
not really connected with politics.
Mm-hmm.
If you're just watching national news media, if you're just sort of looking in from the outside, you would not think that that's happening.
Yeah.
That everyone's having dinner together, specifically making efforts to talk with the other side.
Mm-hmm.
But yet that is exactly what's happening in Juneau. That's 100% what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I'm 100% with you that shouldn't just be advice to politicians.
Right.
That should be advice to everyone. Everyone needs to be asking themselves, when was the last time they had dinner with somebody who voted differently than them in the last election?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what we need to do in order to maintain the strength of our communities and to protect our democracy. Democracy is a fragile thing, and it only remains, the beacon of light that it can be for the rest of the world, and the source of strength that it has been for those of us that are lucky to be Americans because of the work that people put into it. Mm. It's a muscle that you have to exercise as much as it is, a system. It's practice, just like yoga or running,
Well, the other part of that is it's not just having dinner, although I think that like breaking bread together and like that there is something about that enables people to be a little bit more cordial.
Right.
But I think if you're really listening to somebody, you have to be open to the fact that they may actually be right about something that you're not right about.
Yeah.
And I think in our culture today, we talk at each other and we rehash,
right.
We go to check to see, do I support this or not? Like you go to find out who else does it. Like you don't really, it's not coming directly from you.
You're not doing the work. You're not doing the critical thinking to learn and being willing to potentially be wrong. And any of us can be wrong because we're all human, right?
Right.
We can all be fallible, and there's opportunities to learn along the way. And I think that as soon as we lose our humility and we stop really listening to other people, that's where things get a little dangerous and a little crazy.
Oh, that's the scary part. Like whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, having your own people attack you for a particular view that you have is sometimes the scariest place. You expect the other side to disagree with you and scream at you. But when your own side disagrees with you, screams at you, and potentially uses name calling, that's where it's really, I mean, I know I'm just preaching to the choir, but that's really problematic. You're in the minority. You served in a bipartisan majority.
3 times.
Yeah. So you had a brief little window into what it was like to be in the minority and then to be in the majority. For a legislator, for example, who's only been in the minority, what's the difference?
I mean, when you're in the majority, you get to write the budget and you have the power of the gavel, so you can stop, pieces of legislation from advancing. There's also different ways of using power, right? And one of the things that is complicated about the legislature is how absolute power can be sometimes within the legislature. So, being able to chair a committee, to set the agenda, to advance legislation that you think is going to make people's lives better, that's a very strategically important position to be in. It also can be kind of, challenging or dangerous when you have things that aren't related to merit that keep things from moving forward. And I'll give you an example. My one of the pieces of legislation I worked on in my first full session, the 2017 to 2018 session, was a healthcare price transparency bill, and it ended up passing as an amendment into Senate Bill 105 on the last day, and that's because the then rules chair didn't support healthcare price transparency. And so on the Senate side, so it had made it all the way through the House, 2 committees, the House floor, 2 committees on the Senate side, and was sitting in the Rules Committee, and all the Senate Rules Committee chairperson had to do was schedule it for a vote, and they didn't do that. Mm-hmm. And so we ended up amending it into Senate Bill 105, which was a bill that Senator David Wilson had been working on. It was part of a grand bargain that was worked on. And we did that with the awareness of senators on the other side. So we weren't surprising anybody, but it was essentially like a last minute procedural maneuver, at, I don't know, it was like maybe 11 o'clock at night on the last day of the session. We did that.
I love that piece of legislation. It's such an important piece. Something that a couple of legislators who've been around for a while, I've heard them say it, but it doesn't mean anything to me yet. But they'll say, passing a bill is only part of the work. Because once a bill is passed, it doesn't necessarily change anything. And I'll just say, as somebody who works in the healthcare field, the costs still don't appear very transparent to me.
Well, it's not being enforced is the problem. Right. So the healthcare price transparency legislation was passed. It requires the 50 most frequently provided services be listed in a public place with their undiscounted price. And it's not being enforced by the state of Alaska right now, which is the biggest, challenge. And so you've got a piece of legislation that's on the books. The state of Alaska is choosing not to enforce it at this point in time. So the public is not benefiting from this really important piece of legislation.
It seems super terrible. It's such a good piece of legislation, and cost transparency would, help bring down the cost of healthcare. I was just having a conversation with a legislator just before I came here, talking about what it's like for me to prescribe a medication at an urgent care, which is, everyone's insurance is different.
Yeah.
And sometimes the medication will be covered and sometimes it won't. And sometimes different pharmacies charge drastically different amounts if you're a cash pay. And I can't see it. And it's one of those things where I'm like telling the patient, because I've had these nightmares where like an elderly patient will come back and say, I got that blood pressure medicine you wanted, but it was $120. And I'm like, oh my God, why didn't you call me? I could have gotten you something similar for $10. Like you did not need to do this.
Right.
And they're like, well, I really liked you and I trusted you. And so I just assumed this was the best one. I was like,
right. But people don't always know.
I could have done it. I could have, I could have made it cheaper for you. And I would have, but and I feel very strongly about this. That cannot be my job. My job cannot be to memorize the cost of every single different drug and how they're all covered by different insurances. And then what the price difference would be if you picked it up at Walmart versus Cars versus Costco. You can't.
No, it shouldn't be the healthcare provider's responsibility to know every little thing. They should know what their company charges for something. They can't be necessarily responsible for what everything is. However, I will just say that, in healthcare, there's a lot of healthcare administrators out there that if we designed a system with patients in mind, we could change the way practices are run in ways that are a lot more patient-centric. And right now they're not super patient-centric. They're sort of payment-centric. It's about making sure that, I think healthcare providers aim to be patient-centric, but I think in the way that they practice healthcare, but I think that we need to rethink that the way that we've designed our healthcare system so we can really be thinking with the patient in mind. Right. And that means a lot more transparency. That means a lot more information, and a lot more education. It's complicated to unpack, reforming the healthcare system, but there has been some good work that's been done over the years, and I think some of the things that have been done recently. And I'm going to pivot a little bit over, when I think about some of the kinds of ways that we have changed our system to reduce healthcare costs for patients include increasing access to mid-level providers. So it's easier for mid-level providers to bill Medicaid these days. So it used to be that you couldn't get a lot of kinds of care if you were on Medicaid, for example. So there's mid-level providers. We've expanded access to telehealth very dramatically, which reduces unnecessary travel, for example.
Thank you.
There's a lot of really important things that we have done. We can do a lot more of them. Honestly, we need bigger systems change to really get to where we need to go over the long run to help us save money and ensure that patients are getting the quality care that they need. But we can't give up just because there's not, we're not going to get to single payer in the next 5 years. But we can sort of, take a bite out of it a year at a time, improving things every single year along the way.
I want to pivot really fast. You were chair of Ways and Means.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that experience and that committee? I serve on it.
Mm-hmm.
I get a lot of feedback from people criticizing the committee itself on both sides of the aisle. And just what did the committee mean to you and what was that experience like?
I think it was a frustrating experience for me chairing the House Ways and Means Committee. So I think that, one of the votes I'm most proud of in my entire time in the legislature was the vote that I took on SB 26 in 2018, because it allowed for the use of permanent fund earnings to help pay for government services, in addition to providing permanent fund dividends to Alaskans, and serves to protect the permanent fund from overdraws, if even only in statute, which I think is a really important thing to do. One of the things that I have been most frustrated about is the fact that there really feels to me like there's a lack of political courage in it right now. People do not want to take difficult votes. They're not, and it may be that, I'm, being nostalgic for times of yesteryear that maybe never existed. But I feel like sometimes politicians are more focused on getting reelected and not making waves than they are solving the really big problems that must be solved. And it was very, very frustrating to me being a part of very slim majorities. The largest majority I was a part of was 23. So they got smaller from there. So that's like saying something, right? Because it takes 21 votes. So it was really, really difficult to get things done. And just a couple of people, sometimes just one person, could be the difference between passing a piece of legislation and not passing a piece of legislation. So getting to the point where you pass a comprehensive fiscal plan was very, very frustrating. So what we did was focus in on educating people and helping folks in the legislature to understand the basic facts. I think what a lot of people outside the legislature, I think you see elections, but it's not always clear the extent to which it makes a big difference when the players change, when the people that are making policy decisions change so dramatically. When you have 25% turnover in the House on a very regular basis, you have to re-educate people, the new people that show up every single 2-year time frame. And that takes a lot of time. And it does get in the way of solving really big problems over the long term. So, I'm proud of some of the things that we did. I'm also, I feel regret and frustration over the fact that there's not a lot of political courage in the legislature that was willing to take the tough kinds of votes that I feel like were really necessary. And I'll tell you, a lot of people told me that the reason my mom never got reelected was because she voted for an income tax when she was in the legislature in that period of time. And I think it did negatively impact her politically. And because of those close elections, you could see like just a few people being, swayed by that decision would be a very big deal. And so I was very careful to do my homework and make sure I really didn't get out ahead of my constituents on fiscal policy. I voted for a progressive income tax in 2017, and I did not experience political consequences. And I think that there's a small number of districts where that kind of thing makes a very big difference. But just as much as anything else, it's about the work that you do out with your constituents, knocking doors, telling the story, talking about it, really sharing the real math, the real numbers, and just digging deep and doing what's right.
You decided not to run for re-election.
I did.
Yeah. Can you talk about that decision?
It was a really difficult decision. I didn't want necessarily to leave, but it was the right thing to do for my family. So,
and you're now at the Nature Conservancy.
Yeah.
But did you know that was going to be the next step?
No. I had no idea what I was going to do next when I chose not to run for re-election. You know, when you're in the legislature, like especially those last couple months, like you can't think about really anything else. You're just all legislature all the time. It's very time consuming. So I just decided not to make that decision until after I came home and had some time to decompress and kind of explored some different issues and ideas. And what I knew was that I wanted to work statewide. I wanted to remain deeply committed to my community. I wanted to work on big, sticky issues. One of the things I love to do is to learn and solve challenging problems. And in 2019, we had just absurd wildfires. We had record heat. There were triple-digit heat, triple-digit highs in South Central Alaska, which I don't think had ever happened in my lifetime. And I was trapped on the other side of one of those fires at our family cabin in Talkeetna that summer of 2019. And it really made it clear to me that I kind of we needed to do something about climate change. It wasn't an extra thing. It was a bread and butter thing that we had to do now. And so, climate was one of the things that I explored working on. And when I was looking at organizations I would want to work with, I'm a moderate. I want to work for an organization that is really understands that people come first, and that we're not asking people to make a choice between protecting the environment and providing for their families. And my pitch to the Nature Conservancy was that we would work on economic solutions to climate change so that we could try to help Alaskans make a living, provide for their families at the same time as addressing climate change, which is arguably one of the biggest problems of our time.
Hey, I'll just throw it in there that I was at the Military Defense Forum last week, and there was a topic on climate change, and they really focused on how we're not debating about what caused climate change, but accepting it as a reality and then planning accordingly. That, our security depends on it.
Absolutely.
Our economic future depends on it. Accept the facts and a plan accordingly.
That's right. That's right. It's happening. So what are we going to do about it? And also, not only is this a military security issue, it's a food security issue. We have parts of Alaska that aren't able to fish for foods that they have fished for millennia. We have parts of Alaska where caribou are not coming down. A caribou, hunt in the interior was canceled this year because the caribou just aren't coming, and their numbers are low. So this is not extra. This is like bread and butter right in the middle. And also there's a lot of really exciting, economic opportunity associated with this. We can, by increasing our investment in renewable energy, we can reduce energy costs for individual Alaskans, for state and local governments by reducing, energy costs that schools and hospitals have to pay for, as well as creating new jobs and new businesses in the private sector along the way. This is a win-win-win. Let's just roll up our sleeves and do it. We can make money, we can make people's lives better, and we can address climate change in Alaska.
Hey, last question.
Yeah.
Do you have a book you want to recommend? I'm springing it on you.
Oh, yeah, that is an interesting question. I mean, I would probably be remiss if I didn't say All We Can Save by our chief scientist at the Nature Conservancy. It's a really good book it's Catherine Hayhoe wrote it. and it's about the climate. It's about the climate crisis. Just the top one there. It's about the climate crisis. There's some really interesting stuff in there. She's an evangelical Christian who lives in rural Texas, and spends a lot of time talking with folks about just the facts of climate change and the very real concrete things we can do to address it today. And in Texas, in Alaska, in North America, and all across the world.
Hey, well, Ivy Spohnholz, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And thank you for the work you're doing at the Nature Conservancy.
Thank you so much, Andrew. This was really fun.
Big thank you to Maya Narong for making this podcast listenable, and thank you to you, our listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email eastanchoragebbookclub@gmail.com. That's East Anchorage Book Club, all one word, @gmail.com.